Big changes are coming to Texas, and if you or someone you know is undocumented, this could change everything. The House just greenlit 3 major immigration reforms that could open doors to healthcare, education, legal status, and stronger protections for millions of people living in the shadows. Curious about what this means for Texas and undocumented immigrants? Stick around, because I'm breaking down all the details you need to know right now. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of these reforms, I want to take a moment to acknowledge how hot and complicated immigration has become in recent years. It's a topic loaded with emotion, politics, and real human stories, so these changes aren't just about laws, they're about people's lives, dreams, and futures. And what's happening in Texas is a snapshot of a much bigger national conversation. So, what exactly did the House approve? Well, 3 major reforms, each tackling different but deeply connected parts of immigration policy, especially focused on undocumented immigrants who have been living in the shadows for years. These reforms address everything from access to state benefits, pathways to legal status, to protections against deportation, and they're coming at a time when Texas is one of the states with the largest undocumented populations in the country. That makes these reforms not just important, but potentially groundbreaking. The first reform that the House greenlit is about expanding access to essential services for undocumented immigrants, especially healthcare and education. Historically, Texas has had some of the toughest policies restricting undocumented immigrants from receiving public benefits. But this reform seeks to change that by allowing undocumented residents to access certain state-funded healthcare programs and education resources, including in-state tuition for undocumented students attending public universities. This is huge. Think about the thousands of families who have been living in Texas for years but couldn't get health insurance or had to pay outrageously high out-of-state tuition because of their immigration status. This reform will allow more people to get preventative health care, manage chronic conditions, and pursue higher education without breaking the bank or facing impossible barriers. The long-term impact? Healthier communities, better educated young adults, and ultimately a stronger Texas economy. Now, of course, this part of the reform is controversial. Opponents argue that extending benefits to undocumented immigrants is unfair and costly. But supporters point out that many undocumented immigrants already contribute billions in taxes annually, and investing in their health and education pays off by reducing emergency healthcare costs and increasing workforce productivity. The second reform deals with providing a clearer, more streamlined pathway to legal status for undocumented immigrants currently living in Texas. This is a topic that has been debated for years at the national level, but this reform takes a state-centered approach. It sets up a process where certain undocumented immigrants who meet specific criteria like continuous residence, employment history, no serious criminal record, and paying state taxes can apply for a conditional legal status that offers protection from deportation and work authorization. This conditional status is a game changer. It doesn't grant a full green card or citizenship immediately, but it provides stability and security, allowing recipients to live openly, work legally, and plan for their futures without the constant fear of raids or deportation. And after maintaining this conditional status for a set period, many will be eligible to apply for permanent legal status. Texas has been one of the states pushing back against federal immigration policies, but this reform shows a different approach, one that acknowledges the reality of undocumented immigrants living and working in the state and tries to bring them into the system in a way that benefits everyone. If implemented successfully, this could reduce the number of undocumented immigrants living in fear and boost local economies by formalizing a huge segment of the workforce. The third reform is centered on immigrant protections, specifically expanding legal aid and support services for undocumented immigrants facing deportation or detention. The House approved funding for state programs that provide free or low-cost legal representation to immigrants in removal proceedings, which has been a major barrier for many. Why does this matter? Because studies show that immigrants with legal representation are far more likely to win their cases or get favorable outcomes, yet many cannot afford attorneys and end up navigating complex immigration courts alone. By funding legal aid, Texas aims to make the immigration process fairer and reduce wrongful deportations. This reform also includes measures to improve detention conditions, ensure access to medical care while detained, and enhance oversight of immigration enforcement within the state. These protections reflect growing concerns about human rights and the treatment of immigrants, which have sparked protests and legal battles over the last few years. Okay, so those are the three main reforms the House greenlit. Now let's break down what this means for Texas specifically and for undocumented immigrants living there. First, Texas is home to one of the largest undocumented immigrant populations in the U.S., estimated at around 1.6 million people. That's about 6% of the state's total population, and these individuals contribute significantly to the economy, culture, and communities of Texas. From agriculture and construction to hospitality and healthcare, undocumented immigrants fill critical roles that keep Texas running. Historically, Texas has had a reputation for tough immigration enforcement and policies that made life very difficult for undocumented immigrants. But these reforms indicate a shift toward a more pragmatic approach, one that balances law enforcement with recognizing the realities of millions of people who call Texas home, undocumented or not. One of the most immediate impacts we're likely to see is on education. For years, undocumented students in Texas have faced barriers to accessing in-state tuition rates and scholarships. This reform could make college more affordable and accessible for thousands of young people who've grown up in Texas but lack legal status. It's not just about fairness, it's also about investing in a future workforce that Texas desperately needs. Healthcare access is another huge win. Many undocumented immigrants currently avoid going to clinics or hospitals because of fear of deportation or high costs. By expanding access to state-funded healthcare programs, this reform can help reduce public health risks and lower emergency healthcare spending in the long run. Healthier individuals also mean healthier communities and workplaces. For undocumented workers, the pathway to conditional legal status is transformative. Imagine no longer having to live with the fear of deportation every day, being able to apply for a work permit, and starting to build a more stable life. This kind of security can boost job performance, mental health, and community engagement. Now, it's important to be realistic. These reforms are ambitious, but they're not without challenges. Implementation will require coordination between state agencies, local governments, and community organizations. There will also be political pushback from groups who oppose any easing of restrictions on undocumented immigrants. Plus, these reforms don't change federal immigration law that remains under the jurisdiction of Congress and federal agencies. But by passing these state-level measures, Texas is joining a growing movement of states taking immigration matters into their own hands to address local realities. So, what should undocumented immigrants in Texas do to prepare or benefit from these reforms? First, stay informed. Keep an eye on official announcements from Texas government websites and trusted community organizations. These reforms will roll out over months, with application processes and eligibility criteria clarified along the way. Second, gather and organize your documents. Proof of residence, employment, tax payments, and clean criminal records will likely be essential to qualify for the Conditional Legal Status program. If you don't have copies of your documents, now is a good time to start compiling them. Third, connect with local immigrant advocacy groups and legal aid organizations. They can help guide you through the new processes, provide free or affordable legal advice, and support you in accessing healthcare or education programs. And for residents who are U.S. citizens or legal residents, these reforms are also important to understand because they impact your community, your neighbors, and potentially your family members. Supporting fair and humane immigration policies helps build stronger, more resilient communities. To wrap things up, the House's greenlighting of these three immigration reforms marks a significant turning point for Texas and its undocumented population. Expanding access to healthcare and education, creating pathways to conditional legal status, and enhancing immigrant protection show a commitment to pragmatism, fairness, and human dignity. Whether you're directly affected by these reforms or just watching from the sidelines, this is a moment to pay attention because immigration policy isn't just about laws, it's about people's lives, hopes, and the future of our communities.